Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Higher Ed Conversations webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about medical and research imaging and how Qumulo works with PACS systems. I'm joined by my colleague, Zahir Hulays, our technical alliances leader. Zahir has a fantastic background on the product side of things, as well as working with a number of our technical partners, and is a real expert working with customers and partners around PACS and medical imaging. So we're really lucky to have him with us today. Our agenda is to sort of start with an overview of PACS imaging and the technology landscape that Zahir is going to lead us through. And then he and I are going to have a bit of a conversation about use cases in higher education, the importance of a file data platform as it relates to PACS and research and medical imaging, how Qumulo can help. We also, of course, will have time to take your questions, so please put those in the chat as we go. If we don't have time to go through all of them today, we can definitely answer them offline. So please don't be shy and join in the conversation, add your questions into the chat. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Zahir, who's going to lead us through an overview, a very quick overview of the PACS landscape and technical issues there. So Zahir.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. So what we have here is what would have been a typical PACS implementation, kind of a code diagram of, you have the modalities, you have the EMR, HR, you have the folks who are accessing the data. They all access it via the PACS system, and then the PACS system is sending and reading data both to a cache that is generally pretty expensive cache, that where the data would land and get read from initially. And then there is a secondary storage that would normally be called the archive, which is where the A in archiving in PACS comes from. And that is a system that, that is well understood and it's been around for a while, but it has its complexities. And we are seeing a lot of the PACS vendors and VNA vendors are also moving towards a simpler system where, and if you advance to the next stage or the next slide, you will see that really kind of getting rid of that cache tier of storage. And so with advent of modern file storage platforms like Qumulo, where we're able to provide the performance of that all-flash layer along with the affordability and the economics of the archive tier, customers and the PACS vendors are able to get rid of that expensive cache tier. And so the Qumulo architecture really is a flash in the front and spinning disk in the back. So that gives you the performance of the all flash. So the PACS system can write data directly into an all flash layer and read back from it, while the older studies get moved into the lower tier. And then there's obviously continuous replication. Obvious advantages here for customers and for the PACS vendors. For the PACS vendors, it's a simpler architecture to build. For the customers, it's simpler to manage. You don't have to figure out, is the study in cache? Is it in archive? Do I have to go move it? And we talk to a lot of customers who, once they move to the system or to this type of implementation, they never have to worry about where the study is and how it's going to move it up to a surgeon or a doctor who needs it, especially in case of emergency. You have a patient shows up in the emergency room, you need to pull up priors. It's available. They can go grab it very quickly. And so we talked a little bit about the flash first single tier file storage. So what a Qumulo kind of is, the architecture, like we mentioned, is all the writes go to an all flash layer, and then there is usually backing disk behind it. And the Qumulo file system, we actually manage that data movement. So all that data will go ahead and land on the all flash, and then the first reads are coming out of it. But then we'll talk a little bit about why it works well when a data is an image or a study is on it for a while and then it moves back to the hard drive. We're then able to move that data back. And I just want to point out that folks like Change Healthcare, GE, Fujifilm, Philips are moving that way, all moving towards that single tier of storage, and that just helps simplify everything and the infrastructure and just makes it easier to use. And so, this is an example of why Qumulo is good for this use case for PACS. And then, it's useful to bring up for, in the medical application, but it's also helpful in research, and we'll talk about that as well. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of chest x-rays in the last 2 years. And so, we are using this example. This is just a CT scan. And so, this is simplified version. So a CT scan is made out of like usually hundreds or tens, if not hundreds of slices, depending on the scan itself. And so one of the KPIs that, a PACS team is looking at is like time to first image and like time to snap between a physician clicks on that study for it to show up, and then, time for that whole study to show up. And as you guys know, a surgeon will, or a physician will, or a radiologist will click the study, it'll pop up, and they immediately start scrolling, and they're expecting the images to be there. And so what we have in the red boxes here are just kind of a representation of how a PACS system might pull up images. So they'll pull up the first few slices, and then they'll get randomly from the rest of the study in order to present to the user, to that end user, some of the images so they can start looking. And by the time they scroll all the way to the end and they start scrolling back, hopefully their hope is that the images have been processed. What Qumulo does, what our advantage is that we do not manage, we don't look at, the PACS system is accessing file, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and throughout. What we actually look at is the PACS system is actually accessing a bunch of blocks, and these blocks are sequential. So, and we have an understanding of when these blocks were created and how they're stored and how they get used. And so what the Qumulo file system does, it looks at like this read pattern, and then it immediately recognizes that all of these slices, like all of these data blocks, are going to get used. So if these were on the hard drives, we actually go and then move them up to the SSD or the all-flash layer, or even promote them to the RAM in order to provide as fast an access to the user of that data. And this has obvious applications and implications for hospitals and for healthcare workers, that we save them wall clock time. So a radiologist double clicks, they're not waiting tens of seconds in some cases for the entire study to show up. The study is there for them as soon as they click. But we're seeing more and more customers, especially in the research institutions, like hospitals attached to research institutions, who will then have, the research side are going to take these images, and they're gonna get rid of that patient information, and they're going to anonymize the data. But then they're going to start using research on them, especially when it comes to ML and AI applications and training models. You have to be able to feed the data to these models very quickly. The compute is your expensive thing that you have to kind of like cut the cost of. And the ability to read this data very quickly and these images very quickly, these studies very quickly, means that we're able to keep the compute very busy and very full in that pipeline. So you get to the results quicker, and then you're able to get to that, you're able to train your models faster. And with us being on-prem and in the cloud, you're able to move that data in the cloud, and especially when you get to AWS or GCP or any of the hyperscalers, you want to use, the compute is very expensive, and it's more expensive than storage. So the ability to compute very quickly is very important. And we have some data points that we would be able to share with customers on how we can enable that. If there's, once you reach out, we'll show and quantify how quickly we're able to feed that compute depending on the implementation. And so, kind of like in short, we really help you streamline your medical imaging workflow here at Qumulo. We are able to aggregate all that data on one system that can include PACS, multiple PACS implementations, VNAs, digital pathology. As that keeps growing, we're able to help you aggregate all of that data in one system, simplify the IT infrastructure, simplify the life of the PACS admins and the system administrators, but at the same time providing a faster, cheaper, simpler access to the data for all involved.
Great, thank you, Zahir. As we'll shift gears now and kind of have some questions for you and some discussion. And again, for those listening, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll try to get through as many as them as we possibly can. If we don't have time for it, we'll take those offline. I think first of all, Zahir, and coming back to that last diagram that we showed, which is admittedly a very simplified kind of schematic overview of a lot of complexity. Like, could you share a bit about how, you've worked with hospitals and on the medical side of things to actually implement, this in kind of real world clinical patient care environments? Some of those may be academic medical centers where they're attached to universities. Some of them may be, hospitals and pure sort of medical center customers. But how have the implementations actually gone? Like, how has that sort of simplified diagram like worked in the real world?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is a large healthcare system in Oregon. They actually implemented. They wanted to do kind of a POC just to sort of try it out, and we kind of went and implemented the system for them. And at first, it was a very it was just for the PACS. It was just just for the radiology PACS. It didn't include cardiology or any of the other modalities. And the experience that physicians had was so incredible that we couldn't, they actually just ended up buying because it became clear that they were just not going to rip it out. They went from having to wait sometimes over a minute for studies to studies being on the screen, fully loaded in less than a couple of seconds. And they continue to use that specifically for the PACS, and they will be adding more and more workloads to it. But they're, as they should, they're moving slowly and assessing what the impact of other departments would have. The largest health system in Pennsylvania, they have a large implementation where the way it sort of went was, first we're going to do the cache, and then we're going to expend the cache from 90 days to almost a year. And then we're going to go ahead and now we can just add everything here. And then they went and got a VNA. And so they then added the VNA, and then they got digital pathology, and they added digital pathology. And so that ended up aggregating the medical images in one space. And then it's really helped from the management perspective. But then also became one thing they also then started doing is their EMR and EHR data start to get on there. And so the medical research side of it really like that, because all of the data is in one place. They can go, they can anonymize, and they can grab and do their research. And it's all coming off one system that's easy to use. And with, one other thing we didn't go through here is like how easy it is to manage, and how do you kind of like help aggregate how much data each person or each department gets. And so that makes it really easy for all these different departments and for to get the data they need and how much data they need. And also for the administration layer to figure out, okay, radiology, you are using, X amount and it's growing at a Y percentage faster than you expected. Let's figure out why. And if we can either remediate that, if not, we can then know when we need to buy storage. And then, if you're doing chargebacks or kind of shamebacks or whatever, you're able to kind of like show that to your end customers and get that ability to say to them like, hey, this is how much data you're using. We either need to get that under control, or you're able to get their buy-in. If you are also a research environment, what you're able to do is then figure out, do I need to actually segregate that research side out? Because for the medical layer, some customers have chosen to actually use the replica of the second copy of the data for the research, so that researchers are accessing the data that way. And so most hospitals would have 2 copies as required. And they're using the secondary copy. That way the primary site is not, there's not excessive workload hitting that system. It's coming off the replica side, so they can go and read off of it and the researchers can read off of it just fine. They can do whatever research they need to do off of it, and it doesn't impact the primary workload.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. And I think across the board at Qumulo, we've seen the range of customers in the space, and you sort of started to allude to this, that you've got sort of pure patient care focused organizations. Then you've got some that may be academic medical centers, or they may be affiliated with a university or have a research element associated with them. And then, in a few minutes, we'll talk about the sort of pure research, no patient care. But I'd love it if you elaborate a little bit more on that kind of bridge between the clinical patient care and the research side of things, because I think that that impacts quite a few major universities. So you mentioned in the slides kind of the advantages around AI and ML. You spoke just now about kind of the advantages of sort of concentrating the storage and having it in a single location and ease of management. Are there other advantages that you've found for kind of bringing that clinical or patient care focused data into the research side of the house and sort of exposing it and making it useful for researchers?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll give you an example. One of our largest, probably like, maybe top 20 customers, they have the largest repository of digital pathology images. And those are, it's actually it started out as a research project attached to a university hospital, and now it's its own private company. And so having that, there are all the advantages of having Qumulo, because especially in digital pathology, or like if you're doing MRIs, large data sets, massive data sets that have to be read quickly, and then training AI and ML models. But the training of the ML models has to be done by experts. So having that ability of being under the same umbrella or under the same roof really has helped a lot of the research institutions and many of our customers really accelerate how much like that training of their models, because the expert, it's not you, me, or like somebody who is like saying yes or no, or training the model. The people training the models are probably some of the most expensive resources that anyone has. You have the top radiologists, oncologists, pathologists who are training these models. And so having them under the same roof and having access to not just the images, but having access to the entire record of the health system has really enabled a lot of our customers. And we've seen that in kind of the ability to accelerate the time to results, because not only can they have access to the images, and it's not just a yes or no. There are a lot more data points that they could have access to. Obviously, all of that is anonymized and governed by different research institutions and how it's accessed. But once that's figured out, that data is there for them to use, and they don't have to figure out how to move it, how to get it. And it is having it all under the same umbrella ensures the security and the safety of that data. And it doesn't have to go across, the wire to a separate location. It is under the same institution, and there are ways to provide access to it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think another point that I want to kind of draw out that you've mentioned in a few different contexts is the sort of, ease of use factor, right? So you've got ease of use for the admins. You've also got the time factor for whether that's the researcher or the physician. I mean, you mentioned those as kind of expensive employees. You also mentioned, their time is incredibly valuable. You also mentioned a little bit earlier the notion that, in that one customer example, the physicians were so happy with how fast it was going. I imagine the same is true with the researchers. So could you say a little bit more about the sort of, user satisfaction factor in multiple levels, because it's also the sort of IT admin and infrastructure team that's supporting those folks where, you want to make sure that you're meeting their needs as well. So if you could say a little bit more about that dynamic, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think the satisfaction factor really spans the whole stack. So if you actually, when we're frankly, a lot of our conversations are happening with the IT folks, and whenever sitting in a meeting with like a whether it's the system administrator or like the director or of IT or a CIO. And one of the biggest thing they want is that they do not want the system administrator, when they're hearing from the physicians and the medical side, it is because the system is slow. And so one of the things we want to avoid is having that slowness, or at least helping them figure out if it is slow, why it is slow. And so the analytics that we have in Qumulo allows a system administrator within like 3 clicks to figure out, is this a storage issue or is this a server issue? And then you at least eliminate one or the other. And so that is able to quickly get to an answer. But what we've seen once an implementation happens is we generally they stop hearing from the physicians and the PACS administrators. From the PACS administrator side, they're managing a PACS system and the workflows. They don't want to be thinking about the infrastructure, or they don't want to be thinking about, is my storage slow or fast? Did these studies get imported in time? Are they promoted to the right tier? They just want things to work. And that's what we provide, just things that work. And then from the physician's perspective, it's really about they're sitting down, a radiologist is sitting down, and they click on a study and it needs to show. That their expectation is that I click, it's there, and I can scroll through it and I can do my work. I don't want to wait seconds or minutes sometimes for it to show up. It's there, I did my job, and then on to the next patient. And especially, there's the recent, that got really exasperated in the last 2 years with the workloads for physicians has increased so high, especially for radiologists. So we've seen a higher level of satisfaction. And like when putting these implementations in and then being able to quickly move them into production and then providing a better quality of life for the physician, but also significant savings for the hospitals because they're saving walk clock time. And then you're able to really, you still be more productive in how you utilize your human resources. When you take that to the research side, one of the main things is that, or like kind of frustrations, is as a researcher, you're generally part of a larger organization, and you're making reservations for assets, especially for compute assets. You say, I need 10 hours of this much compute, and you reserve it and it's yours for that time. The last thing you want is have your storage be too slow to actually feed the data to that compute. Because all of a sudden, you spend the money on the compute, you reserve the compute, you reserve this, you have the storage. You don't want that storage to be the bottleneck. And so that's what we see from researchers, especially at research institutions, and we have quite a few of those that like, hey, I know where my data is. I know I'm going to get to it fast. And when we're buying the storage, whether on-prem or the Qumulo storage on-prem or in AWS, we know what the performance profile we want, and then we could like just tightly scope it so we're getting what we want.
Yeah, that's great. And, as we start to wrap up here, Zahir, I would love to sort of get your opinions on, we've talked a lot about the medical imaging context, but, universities are vast places. The major research universities have PACS systems in all sorts of different departments and kind of unexpected places. So I would love to get your thoughts on just, if we leave aside the medical context, I mean, I've heard of examples of X-ray systems being used in the anthropology department or the archaeology department. Could you share a little bit about, apart from the sort of technical advantages that I think you've already covered, just exactly how, Qumulo could help with PACS systems in kind of unexpected places in various large university settings?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, we don't think of anthropology as a use case, but, these things get like, you still need a way to manage that data. And like, you're still using not the same level of a PACS system, but you're still using a PACS system. It's the same at dental schools, for example, where, you're training these dentists to take images and read images. You can also look at like veterinary school as well. It's actually one of the things that sort of surprised me is talking to one of our partners. They reached out about an opportunity with a with a university. I was like, oh, it's a, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think they had a medical school. They're like, no, they have a veterinary school, because it needs to be, it's the same kind of a use case. It's just data that needs to be managed, and you have a point of access that is via a server that takes that raw data, does some compute, and then gives it out. And that's where, we shine.
Great. Yeah. And I think also it comes down to those factors around speed, around cost dynamics, and sort of ensuring that the ROI is there. And then ultimately, like the platform, fitting with the use case, and as well, like having all the partnerships in place that I know you and your team have been driving on the technical side of things, so that it just is very straightforward to set up and implement. Because especially in some of those departments that may be not, clinical or healthcare focused, the PACS administrator may be wearing multiple other hats, and they especially like won't be really resourced to troubleshoot a lot of different issues. Well, Zahir, we're coming up on the end of our time today, so just wondered if there was any kind of closing comments or thoughts that you wanted to leave us with.
Yeah, I would just say, as you're looking at what kind of infrastructure you want for your PAC system, I think the things to keep in mind here is you want to start looking at what are the next 5 to 10 years going to look like, and where do we want to be. And these are the conversations we like having, because we know where the industry has been, where it is, and where it's going, and we're here to help get you there.
Great. Thank you so much, Zahir. And as we start to wrap up today, I do want to emphasize again, as Zahir just said, we're here to help on the Qumulo side. We've got technical expertise. We've got partnerships and relationships with all the leading PACS vendors, which Zahir and his team have put together. So, let's continue this conversation after today's webinar. If you're viewing this on demand or after the fact, please reach out to us if you have questions and would like more information. We have more information on our Qumulo website around, the integrations and the partnerships. We also have some of the customer stories, and that information is shared, and we're updating that all the time. And I think one other point, to mention is Zahir talked about kind of POCs and trials that have been done. We're really set up to sort of have you put the technology to the test. So you can request a technical deep dive with us, a demo or a POC. And last but not least, we're going to take a little bit of a break with the holiday season approaching. But as we start the new year off, we're going to have some additional higher ed conversations with university customers around research computing, around video surveillance. And then as we get further into the new year, we're also going to talk about genomics and other topics. So I hope you'll pay attention for more information on those in the new year. And again, thank you, Zahir, for your time today. Thank you all for joining us and your questions. And I think we will leave it there.